What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Real Talk, where we try to keep things fresh, keep it real without all the weird BS in the world. But you might get some BS from us. But yeah, welcome back. This is Ben here.
And Paul.
And Jack here.
Okay, so apparently we're doing open air. Well, not open air, but we're kind of leaving it. I don't know what do you call it? Unpremeditated. Because usually we come with topic. We try to just get the flow rolling. But yeah. So here we are. Yeah, sorry
Yeah.
we skipped a week, but we figured since we did the Easter special and the juicy gossip relationship bit, we got us. I think Jack was busy, so we decided to just have him when he was available that we do it. Actually, Paul and I were gonna do it anyway, just so we weren't away. But thankfully, Jack freed up schedule and made it work.
Beautiful.
So yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, we really, well, I mean, um, the idea behind this show or like, this podcast is, it's sort of undefined in a way. Like, just like a lot of our faith is undefined, right? Like, you know, um, we believe in God and, we commune with him, right? But, it doesn't mean that everything's sort of like has to be a certain way, right? Like,
scripted.
yeah, nothing's scripted, right? There's a lot of freedom and a lot of you know color and sort of, I guess, even magic in a sense to it, right? Like, and yeah, so we were thinking that um, we would talk today about um, or we've sort of explore our idea, our thoughts on what worship is about. So I'm not really sure where to start with this.
Okay, worship. Hmm. For those of you who have been listening in, and of course those who are new, um, Paul and we go to the same church, and essentially we are also, I like to respectfully admit that we're worship leaders for the church, both for Sunday and for Friday evenings when we do our fellowships. And yeah, I mean, so worship is innately something that we do, right? But so obviously when the first thing you think of worship is the music, right? And it's as obviously, being a church, everybody knows music is such a key vital thing, right? It's all over the Bible, and even in heaven, and when this earth passes away, we're going to be up there essentially celebrating and I think worshiping, right? But I mean, that's sort of that's a bare bone, very safe answer, right? But if I was to go one step further and say, hey, is there more to worship? I personally think there's certain areas and aspects that are worth exploring. An example being is that worship does, I have to admit that it comes in many different forms, right? Not just through music, but you can also, the definition of worship is that you admire God in a it's admiration to God, really, to see how majestic, how awesome, how almighty is he, right? And so this is why we sing, because we want to praise, we want to worship, right? I want to say praise, usually it's songs that uh, uh, sort of magnify God's power and just God's goodness and his grace, and of course Jesus's salvation, for us, right? But when it comes to worship, I think it really comes sort of deep down, where you have this sense of peace and you realize that, wow, I think it's almost like praise on a new level, right? Which then, yeah, worship can come in many different forms. You can even worship God through arts. If you look at the church and the classic church, um is one of the best examples, with the beautiful designs, the architecture, the stained glass. I mean, a lot of it is a way of the artist to express their means of worship through an art form, right? Or sometimes people can write maybe not necessarily a song, but maybe the lyrics in that regard. And I think that is also a form of worship. I even say, you can worship God in a day-to-day aspect. I remember, I think Paul gave me a really astute piece of advice years ago, and he said to me, if you enjoy God's blessing, inadvertently you that's also for worship because you're allowing yourself to be blessed, right? Because I think if you sort of deny or you pick and choose what you want to be blessed by God with, I think in a weird way you're kind of, I mean, we kind of become immature. I think if it's sounding too harshly, but immature in a way of how we handle our walk with the Lord, right? So to me, I think this is, I mean, obviously we're just scratching the surface of the conversation, but to me, I think that's how I look at worship. There's different layers, there's different means to go about it. But I think if your heart is in the right place, meaning, worshiping God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, that really is just a simple criteria. Right?
Yeah, yeah. There's just so much to say. Like, I mean, I'm thinking over a lot of what Ben has just been sharing, and I mean, that's exactly what my heart, where my heart is, right? Like, and as worship leaders, it's something, it's something that um, we think, it's we're always, well, one thing we Ben and I talked about before is just how genuine worship has to be, right? Like, you can't, you know um it isn't just about singing words and like the subtleties of what makes a good sound, what communicates clearly to the audience, quote unquote. um you kind of, it can, it potentially can kind of throw you off, right? Like, because worship is, um it's sort of a physical expression of what's spiritually true, right? I mean, you can sound, you hear when worship is hollow, right? Sorry.
I think ultimately the way I'm just sort of maybe trying to unpack it, don't want me cutting in. It comes deep down. It comes from your soul, right? I think because it really it's a sense of your admiration. It does really come like deep down, right? And so, like you're saying, yeah, people will feel it if you sit into a worship session and go, wow, you're just singing words, right? But when you come to a point where, and that's why I encourage even those of you who think you can't sing, it doesn't matter, right? Because if God just wants God's not looking for perfection. If God was looking for perfection, Jesus is that, right? And that's our substitute, right? Of perfection. He knows we can't be perfect, but a lot of times when I encourage people to serve at the church, is that, hey, look, God's not looking for perfection. God's looking for a little bit of effort. Perfection and like really good execution will come in time, come with practice. But effort is the first thing that I think God really wants you to have. Right, everything will fall in place. God will prepare you. I'm always I'm reminded of the quote I think I read somewhere. I can't give you credit for it because I can't remember it. But if you are listening to it, then props to you. But yeah, it was the idea about God. Uh, equips those who are called. He doesn't call those who are equipped, right? And so I think that's in a way it's sort of the beauty of the aspect of worship too. Like 'cause sometimes I think we were also in a worship workshop ourselves from one of the worship leaders that was leading within our church, and this one pastor in the video talked about how worship actually is very pastoral too. Worship should be very pastoral become before it becomes lyrical or becomes musical, because the word should speak um, in itself. I mean, if we go and look at the song "In Christ Alone," man, those words are just super powerful, right? Super powerful because it basically sums up the gospel message in that one song, right? And one other thing just to add on top of that is even just as Paul and I were talking about, I am reminded that when I'm leading worship, I realize even though sometimes I may not be in the mood or if I'm not feeling it, I just give it to God and say, "Hey, God, here it is." And even if I can just get one person in the congregation to sing or in the fellowship to sing, then I've done my job, right? Because I think to me, the way the worship is to lead people to sing to worship God, because that's how it is, right? I mean, sure, we can, unfortunately sometimes we may have to pick up that fake facade and sort of fake it through, but we realize that we're leading it. We're not It's not just about us, it's about worshiping the Almighty God, right? As individuals or even as a corporate body, right? Sorry, off on a tangent.
Okay, I'll talk about based on the topic we're kind of discussing is kind of related to worship, but um, I find that there's a good secret of meditating in God's presence. So, like sometimes, okay, we live in this world that the media is always in your face, adverts, television, social media, and sometimes as Christian we just get caught off guard because we are not focused, we're not in tune with God's word, and sometimes it's really subtle and you don't realize it until like 2 weeks tr- down the track, and you're like, oh, when was the last time I read the Bible? I know I keep telling myself I have to read the Bible, but every time I open the Bible, I find it doesn't speak to me, and I just close the Bible, and work is so hectic, right? So I discovered a trick though, and it's all related to worship. So one of my personal favorites of worship singer is Bob Fitz. He's really really anointed. So his songs are very heartfelt, and it just kind of like throws you into a place that of communion with just you yourself and God. And what I practiced over the last few days is that I'll play all his tracks, the good ones like back in the 70s and 80s, right? And those songs just really create an environment where it's just me and God, and he talks about the heart of God, the love of God, um, God being there for you and things. And it just created this environment that's really peaceful and grounding, and it leads me to open the Bible, and I would just talk to God and say, "Hey, Lord, show me things that I didn't see and stuff." And one of the things I'm just gonna go share a bit personal here. I was going through was that I had some issues with some people at work, right? And it was all based on the fact of wisdom. How are you going to handle these issues and stuff? But through reading the Bible, God actually showed me the books of Acts in the case of Paul and Silas. So he revealed to me that, oh, Paul and Silas were basically Roman citizens of Jewish descent, and they were thrown into the prison because they were out preaching the word and saving souls for the kingdom, right? And I like how the whole story unfolded where they were thrown into prison, but God delivered them because they're worshiping. And it shows that God never fails. When God is with you, He will save you out from situations that normal people couldn't get out of, and He will provide the means. He'll give you the wisdom. And then, when long story short, after reading that the story of Paul and Silas, it shows that the federal people of that state threw them in prison, and they decided to let them go. But God give them the wisdom how to handle situations of conflicts with people as well. He actually told the prison guard that they would not go unless the magistrate sent people to escort them out of the prison. You know, and in that context, it's actually really wise because they were wrongfully accused of something that they didn't. You know, they were lawful citizens of the country, right? They're Roman citizens, right? So they were wrongfully accused. They're beaten with rods and stuff, but God showed them how to deal with things with wisdom, and not say, okay, let the bygones be bygones and stuff. But they actually confronted the situation, and then they got the people to escort them out from the prison, and so the whole city knew that they were wrongfully accused. But these are like little nuggets of wisdom that we can actually learn from the Bible, and it shows that God actually really care, and He's not a God of like a dainty God. No, He's actually a God who cares. He will not leave His people um, to suffer alone, and he's a God, He's a Father who would do whatever it takes to help you. So yeah, I think worship is important because it's a medium of bringing you into the zone, if you know what I'm saying. All right, I'm done.
Yeah, that actually is absolutely true. Worship is such a vital thing. That's why there's always, praise and worship, or prayer and worship. Like worship is such an innate, part of it's biblical. I mean, heck, angels worship, right? So if angels, go and worship the Lord Almighty, and think, and we're just designed that. That's why I think a lot of it too is that the church is very musical, right, in that regard. And there's a lot of people who are very, the most amazing singers out there, even or the most popular artists in the secular music world also came from church backgrounds, right?
That's interesting.
Anyway, I'm kind of going off
No,
with
no,
that, but
no.
yeah, worship
That's
is actually
that's
very,
good.
key in a lot of different, areas, right? But yeah, again, going back to just to sort of bring that full circle, is like worship can come in different aspects, right? I don't think not just in music, right?
Yeah, actually, when you kind of mentioned that, um, it reminded me of, like C.S. Lewis was talking about how, how we are worshiping creatures, right? Like it's built into us to worship, like, um, and the thing is, y- even though the world has kind of, is sort of in a more secular place, like even in the 40s and 50s when he was writing about these things, like it was already happening and he could see it, and he was saying that we're basically trying to strip away the ideas that we have about meaning and right and wrong and stuff. And it was only in that context that worship of God makes sense, right? You would only worship God when you know um, when God makes sense to you, right? And God only makes sense to you in a world that has meaning, right, behind it, right? Like, but the moment you sort of start, stripping that away, religion and worship doesn't really make sense anymore. And what starts making sense is celebrity worship, right? He was saying, like, if you don't have, if you can't, if you remove the spiritual part of our being, we're only left with superficial and sort of worldly things, and we're still going to need to worship, right? And so we're going to start worshiping celebrities and human achievement and stuff, and um, yeah, it's pretty much exactly kind of the direction the world is going, right? Like, um, and like again, there's nothing really wrong with progress and celebrity and stuff, right? It's just that I mean, you can kind of see it kind of you can kind of see like see things kind of going overboard, right? Like, when you go to a music concert and stuff, like you can see the elements of worship there, right? Like, a charismatic um, artist in the front is like, um, has this spell over a large audience, and they're all sort of raising their arms and like just like losing themselves in something really big, right? And and you know and again, going to a good concert, nothing wrong with that, right? But um like, yeah, again, like, it's not really tied to anything, right? Like what you're doing there, yeah, like, you're sort of surrendering yourself to an experience. And when you worship God, um you're more aware that it's more about, he's sort of leading you to something concrete, right? He's not trying to sort of take you on sort of a um, you know an experience that um, like he's not trying to take you on some sort of spiritual high, or not trying to like whisk you away with some sort of like really amazing like, or like a really a song that really draws you in, right?
I think what
Like, yeah.
kind of just I think what you're trying to say is that God's not gonna try and give you or try to win you over to worship by dumping stuff at you in that regard, and just say, "Hey, you're gonna worship me because or I'm gonna do this, and then you worship me. I'm gonna do this for you, and then you're gonna worship me." Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
This is the way I'm
Well,
processing.
um, I guess another way to put it is like, when you're sort of at a good concert, they take you, they sort of inspire you, and you've got like, you're going through this really amazing sort of immersive experience. You're going through experiences about falling in love, and um, you know, like like just exploring, all the like little interesting things about, or like, really really captivating things about romance, or you know maybe um having like, having your first kid or something like that, the song about something like that.
God's not gonna sell you an idea.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
rather, well, when you worship God, it's about something entirely different, right? Because when you're sort of at a concert, or you're like immersed in celebrity, right? It's about, so there's sort of a fantasy there, right? Like, um and they kind of represent something like, like, amazing to you, right? Like you, and you kind of feel special when they sort of, are able to connect with you somehow, right? But when you're with God, like it's about sort of forgetting about yourself, right? You know what I mean? Like,
That is exactly what I was gonna
yeah,
say,
yeah,
because when I think about it, like, yeah, and I was gonna say, challenge maybe the sort of, those who are still, listening, is the idea that when you worship God, is almost as if, because like I think Paul, best example, when you go to a concert, you're looking for something to satisfy yourself, whether it's a feeling, it's an emotional, or you want to get rid of something, but it's a self satisfying experience. I mean,
right.
hey,
You're looking for an experience, which is why you pay hundreds of dollars for crazy ticket, like, or like, yeah,
exactly. You want to
yeah,
be immersed. You want to lose yourself to something, right? But when you worship God, you kind of you. There's a sense of selflessness. You almost have to die. Like when you in a moment of worship, you go, "Wow, God, you are actually so amazing that, what, I don't care. I don't. Doesn't matter if it starts pouring. If my ligaments start falling apart, I'm still gonna say, praise the Lord, because immediately there's a part of you that actually dies to yourself, and you acknowledge that God is fully in control. God has 100% of what's happening, right? And I think, in a weird way, let's go back to the story of Job, right? If you look at the end of it, I think Job worshipped God with the music, but look at where his heart was, right? And that speaks volumes, right? Pun intended.
uh,
But it's such a crazy thing that, I think when they really to challenge, the idea about worship at the really core, sort of inception style worship, is that, you really have to, is it, we have to look at ourselves and say, in the moment where, okay, maybe, yeah, like the moments when I just mentioned, how if you don't even are feeling it, then maybe why aren't, or why am I not feeling it? What's causing me? What's blocking me from trying to worship God? Am I actually letting things go? Am I just like, in a weird way,
uh,
instead of trying to forget about something, is a matter of letting it go before God, right? Jesus said, bring your burdens onto me because my yoke is light, right? I mean, that's not said by accident, but it's the idea about, losing a part of yourself, and to acknowledge that God should fill those voids in your life, right? Is that it? Is that kind of
no, I guess one thing was going to add to the things we were saying was that yeah, I think and again, Ben and I, like, we tend to, we talk about these things a lot. I don't know why, it just kind of comes up, right? Like, stuff like actually, we just talk about everything. But I guess, like,
well, not literally everything. There's some things. Well, okay, yes, sir, go on. Eh,
anyways, yeah. So um yeah, I guess, we come across, I don't know, I guess worship is kind of on our mind again, because we kind of have leadership roles, and
we
and
lead worship together on multiple occasions. Maybe
yeah,
that's why.
I guess, yeah. But then, like, because yeah, like, there's um I think, we come across a lot of people where, they're kind of stuck on things, um uh oh, come to think of it, I'm not sure we can talk about some of these examples. But,
Why? Do we need
well, okay,
permission?
I guess maybe I'll just sort of give vague examples.
Oh, you threw me on the bus. Is that it?
No,
Okay, all
but
right.
then I don't know if they might be listening. um, but, like, okay, for example, like, okay, like, there might be, a friend or someone who is, they just can't get over, um, maybe like something happened in the past, and they're always sort of thinking of themselves as a victim, I guess, and, like, and then, they're kind of stuck on that, and, it's like their life is kind of stuck on that, like, and at the same time, you're kind of wondering, as, people who are trying to be ministers of worship, like, how do you sort of reach out to a person like that, like, because, like, it's entirely in their power to worship, right? um but they're just holding on to the past, they're they don't take seem to be taking responsibility for the things they've made mistakes with, even though they're sort of honoring God with their lips, but their heart is sort of,
Elsewhere.
I guess, like how can you worship and sort of hold on to certain things, right? Like, I guess that's kind of a question that we sort of ask, and again, I mean, like, we struggle with it a lot too, right? Like, and that sort of extra burden, of taking leadership roles, right? It's part of the cost of what we do, right? But yeah, I don't know.
It's so crazy to think that we're sitting here talking about this because there's so many biblical analogies that we can use from. I mean, Jesus always talks about how, especially those who are in leadership position or teachers will get even more scrutinized only because we represent a certain, I guess, portfolio, maybe facet of ministry that leaders, like you said, teachers are gonna be looked at through even bigger microscope because we teach something. We gotta also practice what we teach. Right? It's the same idea as leading worship. I think it's very. I mean, even for ourselves, even for myself, I need to remind myself that, okay, what are my motives at? Because it's got to be clear. Well, how can I can't be hypocrite. I can't be up there leading people to sing when I can't even get my sin like life dealt with, right? I can't, if I'm doing that, then it's hypocritical. And Jesus always talks about hypocrisy, right? How can you um uh do something but say another, or say something else and just do completely the opposite, right? That's just why he kept talking to the Pharisees. The Pharisees were complete hypocrites at the time, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of why we end up sort of talking about these things so often, I guess, because, like, the weight of the responsibility, I think, is real, right? Like, um yeah, like, it's very easy for worship, like our worship to turn into like sort of a caricature, right? Like, you know um it's very easy for us to sort of, I guess, to want to hold on to something, and then suddenly realize that we're sort of faking our way through, like, Christianity, or worship even, you know
I'm actually a firm believer of, you mentioned that if, say, as leadership at church, or even as fellow Christians out there. Again, I must have said this in another previous cast. If I haven't, then cool, good, got some new stuff. But the idea is the fact that if, say, we're caught in a service, but we're kind of fumbling our way through, or at least we're kind of faking it, I honestly think God will come and step in and just give the individual um a choice. He goes, okay, well, you, it's clearly, I get a sense that you are looking to do the right thing, but you're afraid, or you're not willing to give it up to me, or give something up to give me more presence in your life. Then it's like, okay, you have a choice in that matter, right? And so, because I think everybody gets a choice. God says, okay, you can either walk with me or walk away from me, right? uh yeah, Paul here talked about how we were listening to Pastor Mark Clark back at Village Church, and then he talked about how, again, he summed it up quite nicely. It's either God says, "Oh, your will be done," or we can tell God, "Oh, your will be done," right? So it's really that idea, because, and there's a consequence, right? To, I guess, the reality of life, and the reality of how things should be, right? Wow, that sounded really profound. Anyway, sorry.
and it's starting to sound pretty heavy. I'm not sure what we could do about that.
Yeah, yeah, Jack. Hey, what do you think, bro?
Oh wow. I'm lost in the dense topic. It's pretty dense, but
It's actually kind
um,
of turning more
I don't know.
dense
I
than
think
we thought it would, I think.
Well, there's a certain weightiness because worship is
yeah.
such a crucial part of, like I said, worship is no any heavier than, because it's a theological,
Maybe,
standpoint too, right?
maybe let's give the context of why we're in this deep topic. Okay, so big of a background. Paul and Ben are both like worship leaders in a local church. So a bit of their views are more personal from the point of a worshiper, and how like they have to juggle the responsibility as being leaders in church, and how these challenges sometimes falls into both like their personal personal life, as well as being used by God as vessels to be worshippers. So those sharing earlier is a bit more in depth of what a worshipper would have probably go through in their thought process before a Sunday service would happen. So yeah, there's a bit of a context there. Um, hmm. I think there's also other various of worship, as both Paul and Ben mentioned, beside actually like worshiping through the guitar instrument or just by singing. There could be worship by just volunteering or even just by giving praises to God. So, like if you're volunteering maybe at a local orphanage or local community outreach program, that itself is worship because you're giving God the glory based on the fact that you are a Christian and you're being a true testament to your walk as a Christian and blessing the community. So that itself is worship. Um, Other aspects of worship involves, like for example, you can be giving money to a mission trip, donating money to a homeless shelter, or things like that. Just basic, or even basic act of kindness. That itself is worship. If you're encouraging somebody who's down, or someone who is homeless, or anyone that needs help, that itself is worship because you're sharing the glory of God with them. You're sharing adoration of God with them, and they get to see a bit of your personality, which actually reflects God's love and kindliness, and that itself is worship too. So worship is a big topic, and yeah, we can think if we want to talk more about the various type of worship, or choose on a topic of worship that we would like to talk or explore more. Yeah,
I think it goes back to the one of our previous casts, and again, oh man, I keep referencing like Pastor Mark. So maybe we should start hashtagging
big
him.
fan
He's like,
here.
"You guys are
Pastor
like
Mark,
talking about
big
me."
fan here.
Yeah, super like fanboy. It's like one of our church uncles. He's got this. Oh, I almost chose a poor choice of words there. He's got a fascination, a I would say maybe an unhealthy fascination for a fellow preacher near San Diego, which I won't name drop, but but yeah, but anyway, so yeah, Pastor Marco was talking about how again what we do with our time, talents, and our treasure. And I think honestly, like you said, Jack, if we self-sacrifice, if we give God, our time, if we God give our treasures, and we give God our abilities, our gifts, our talents, that in a way it is. I think it is a form of worship, and probably in some degree or another, because again, it calls you to sacrifice something, right? And I know sacrifice maybe is a bit of a heavy word to use, but it is. You're giving away your money that that you have, but it's kind of silly to think that say you earn 100% and God is only asking you for 10%. It's insane that God lets you keep 90% of what's still His, right? I'm still kind of perplexed, like, wow, God, you're so graceful in that way, right? But of course, the talents and abilities that you have too, again, that those things, all those things belong to God, right? And so, like, as we're going back to that, it's kind of nice. We're kind of coming back full circle about the idea about selflessness, right? There's a certain part of you that has to acknowledge that you have to surrender and submit to God, right? And that is probably, hopefully, a nice framework for what worship is about, or at least
Mhm.
that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's really the whole idea of worship. Because I'm not sure if everyone or anyone here listening to this podcast have heard the saying that sometimes when you give to people or you give to organization, right, you feel actually more blessed in return than actually giving. So, for example, let's say you go to an orphanage and you volunteer your time there. Sometimes after that volunteer session, instead of feeling tired, I mean, physically you might feel tired or drained out, but you actually feel a sense of gratitude, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of love, peace, and you just feel really grateful that you had impacted someone, within that few hours of your volunteer session there. But that itself is okay. I lost my train of thoughts here. I was trying to say oh yeah, sorry. So when you worship, in that sense, right, you actually give to people, but in return, you actually feel more blessed and you feel more encouraged by the end of the session. So that is actually a two-way thing, because the way the Bible, or the way God created the Christian life is such that when you actually give, you actually receive more than what actually you give out. So, for example, you give your time by helping people, you actually receive more. You feel more happy, you feel more connected, and it's just a strange way of how the dynamics works out. And through the interaction, you're actually blessing that kid's life. But you never know, you might actually meet someone who might be able to bless you in return without knowing it, or you might through that discover something about yourself that you didn't know. Right, so all these are things that is a strange dynamic that God created within our human nature, as well as like the worship in itself. So that's why we're given two hands, 2 feet, and one mouth to give out more and to worship, and 2 ears and 2 hands to receive it. So that's kind of it's a two-way traffic, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, like that. That's and again, I can't. I mean, even going, or rather going back to what Ben has been saying, like um, and sort of tying it to what you've been saying, like yeah, I think yeah, like dying to yourself, um, like is inseparable from serving the people around you, the community and stuff, right? You can't hold on to something um, and serve the community around you. It doesn't work the same way, right? Like, or at least it doesn't. It wouldn't be quite. It wouldn't exactly be an act of obedience in a sense, because I think one thing that made Jesus so aware of the needs around him was precisely because he was able to die so completely to himself, right? Like, it's only when you really die to yourself, like when you've completely let go of yourself, that you can really sort of sense what the real needs are in the community. And then at that point you can you are then able to sort of understand what your role is, right? Like how when you are actually have when you have like a clear idea, and like, are you if you have a clear idea of what the real needs are in the world. That's so distracting. Anyways, um, uh, yeah. So when you have a clear idea of what is, what the real needs are in the world around you, uh, yeah, like it's only then that you can that you have you can really understand how you can use what you have um, to reach out to the people around you, and to properly strengthen them and equip them, and um, lift them up, right? Like, if you hold on to yourself, you're always going to be aware that you're holding on to yourself, right? And you're always going to be sort of wondering why they can't, you know you'll be blaming people for not fulfilling you, or like giving you what you need, right? Like, and yeah, I feel like um yeah, we always, yeah, like you run into people like that all the time, right? Like they're just um like there's just like um
The society and the culture itself is just like this because
yeah.
Vancouver, especially Vancouver, we have this whole thing about self-expressionism. I won't go into this other topic just yet. I think we'll save it for another one. But the idea about, oh, I'm entitled to an opinion, like every, of course, I'm not saying that people's no opinions don't matter, but it's just there's so much self-awareness that because it's almost a travesty, because you kind of think like then everybody's gonna have to tippy toe. It's no longer just being empathetic, sympathetic. It's like, okay, how can I get about something without insulting someone? It's kind of ironic coming from me, which since I basically insult people like everywhere I go. Um, but yeah, that's kind of, I think it's just a culture that's turning into, right. This whole idea about self first, right. I'm not to say that you can't be you should be, I think the bottom line is like being self-aware but not being selfish or being self-centered. I think that's very dangerous, right. And when you think about it, Jesus is exactly the whole thing about is you gotta look in the mirror, you gotta look at yourself first. It's always internal. You gotta internally figure out who the heck you are and what makes you tick, and what makes you who you are, and or what makes you, well, you know what makes who you are as what God designed you to be, right? And so I wasn't I guess this other topic I was gonna bring up wasn't gonna bring up, but it kind of the idea. But I was talking to a friend of mine, and I won't name drop, but Paul knows the individual as well. And this guy was going through some depression, right? And we are going to talk about Christian depression or spiritual low and how does that work. And a lot of it is we talked about self, right? And there is really two ways. People go to self-help books because they want to lift themselves up, they want to be able to feel good, they want to be able to feel great, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But like, to me, if I'm not even putting the Bible in the equation, like, to me, I think if we look at it sort of that in that way, sort just self-help books or self-help whatever it is, and you just feel good for yourself, that's kind of just a band-aid, but you're not really getting to the core of the issue. If you can get to the core of the issue, then great. Now if we put the Bible into the playing field, suddenly it's so opposite, it's so reversed. And I think this is now where I kind of see why people think the Bible could be useful and helpful, because you're actually, not only are you not thinking about yourself, it's exactly what we're talking about. It's selflessness. You forget so many parts of yourself and you realize, wow, this is Jesus guy that's like way better life. Okay, now I feel like I'm picking a side, but since I'm a Christian, I picked a side already. So I'm just gonna go for it. So it's the way better life, it's the way better lifestyle, it's the correct lifestyle. And so it's something that innately, it's not even a band-aid, it's a permanent, like your wound is cut, it's like the perfect surgical move to fix the problem, right? And I think this is such a big contrast. When I was talking to the friend of ours, it's like something kind of clicked in his brain. So now maybe he's juggling between finally understanding what it kind of means to die to yourself biblically versus just like the self-help band-aid, right? And I think again that overlaps with worship because it affects the way how we are and how we are to live our day to day, doing right by God, right?
Mm, that's true. That's really good. Cause, but sometimes, um, yeah, I think regarding the fact that when people are too focused about themselves, sometimes it could be based on the jobs or the kind of like responsibility that they have at work, or just the kind of pressure that they put on themselves. And like then again, it might happen based on being subconscious and not being fully aware of it. But oh, okay, yeah. So regarding depressions and stuff, people sometimes they don't get aware of the fact that how depression actually do start. It could be in relation to work. It could be maybe the responsibility that they have placed on themselves as an individual. But depression happens when basically they fail as a person, or somewhere along the line, something didn't happen according to their expectation, or what should have happened, right? But yeah, train of thoughts. Yeah, so depression is basically the fact that they put a lot of expectation on themselves to perform within whatever scope they are at in life. Could be work, could be finance, could be relationship, and when things doesn't happen the way that it should happen, they usually ended up spiraling in depression. And I'm not just saying anyone; literally everyone have probably gone through depression before. But what we all do realize that the common like denomination of that nomination it would be the fact that self expectations, right? But just bear in mind for the Christian folks out there that basically in life, our life on earth is not by surprise, meaning that everything happens. Oh, we don't know what tomorrow will bring, but it's actually the fact that God has already foreseen the future. So, if for example you're a student and you want to get to the top university, but for some reason you don't hit the mark, and then you have expectations like family, your career, and stuff, and some people end up getting depressed. But just bear in mind that what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to give an analogy, though, but um, is that there's a Chinese martial art called Tai Chi, right? So what Tai Chi is that it's very slow, it's very calculated, it's very precise, and people always mock the fact that Tai Chi is not martial art, it's crap. It's like dancing in the wind, right? In the wind, right? And they always look to another martial arts, for example, martial art or kickboxing, as oh wow, they're really brutal, they're fast, they are deadly and stuff. And no doubt that they are, but you'd be surprised that someone from Tai Chi would be able to actually defend him or herself way better than someone who's probably in the kickboxing martial arts. And the main reason why I'm saying this is because when you practice something for so long and so slow, you're getting your techniques right many hundred times. It's so calculated and you have a lot of muscle memory in comparison to someone who has done like boxing, but their moves are not as calculated and as precise and practiced like numerous times as compared to Tai Chi. So likewise in your life, if you're going through something and something doesn't happen, just know that sometimes you have to go back 2 steps or 3 steps to realize something, to redevelop yourself, to re-upskill yourself, to move forward in whatever direction that you want to go. All right. So depression sometimes happens when we have too much expectation on ourselves, but don't be disheart- disheartened, but look into God's plan because God has a greater future for you, and His plans are not your plan. His steps are not your ways, and that's what I'm trying to say with like a strange analogy of like Tai Chi and stuff, like what I did with Big Macs. But anyway, so carry on. Yeah.
Oh, Big Macs. I love Big Macs. It's good, but you know what? Can't tell between a Big Mac or a Whopper. It's like it's a hard pick. I haven't had a Whopper in a while, actually. Um, I think okay, hold on. Let me regather my thought. Going with the idea about depression and I think spiritual low. This is exactly in the next and Jack, you said it right. I mean, it's inevitable. I remember like when I first broke up with my ex girlfriend almost 10 years ago. Man, I was and when I look back in hindsight, I had textbook depression. It was bad, right? But by the grace of God, I got out of it, and if with colors and rainbows at the end of it, right? And yeah, but when I think about it, especially those who may or listening who may be in moments of feeling spiritual lower or even depression at some level, remember or double check your motive. What's really actually driving the motive, or why you're feeling that way, right? Or why is it kind of happening? And then figure out the motive. Don't lie, don't find excuses, but really figure out why you're feeling like that, or what's causing you in that thought. And because there's always a source, it doesn't happen for a reason, like you said, Jack. There's an expectation, or maybe there's something that you're hoping for but you get shot down, or you ask a girl out but then she said no, and then you go, oh man, the end of the world. Or if this guy's being a douchebag and like, oh my goodness, right? And so yeah, I really just kind of question the motive. And then this is innately exactly the thing about dying to self again, or you lift these things up to God, and God can and will fix those things, right? Yes and no are still answers, right? I mean, God doesn't do things by accident. God doesn't make mistakes. We just interpret them as mistakes. And so yeah, I think it is. I think maybe we can expand on the topic, but since we're getting, this is just a taste of it. The idea about Christians and spiritual lows, or Christians who battle with depression, right?
Yeah, like I mean, I guess there's a lot for me to say about that as well. Depression. Yeah, because I went through kind of a long stretch, I guess, of like not just depression, and it was pretty bad depression, like pretty like severe. Um, but I guess one thing I kind of learned out of that period was what worship kind of looked like, even in the midst of depression, right? Like, um, and yeah, Jack will be closing soon. Sorry. um, yeah. So, and I guess this is the last thing I'd like to say, I guess, for today. And you guys probably you might have some more to add, I guess, before we close. But um, yeah, um, I mean, and again, depression is a whole can of worms, like a massive can of worms, and but I guess one thing I will say was that um, as I was kind of going through that depression period, and I think this was in my mid 20s, probably well up into maybe just before I turned like 30, around that time. Like I think it was a little bit more pronounced because it almost came in the name of Jesus, and that was sort of that was sort of a very um that kind of that is kind of what kind of made it stick a bit more, because here I am trying to understand my role as a believer, and trying to live a life of integrity to honor God, And I'm the one who has to sort of sort through all these all this difficult things kind of going through my head. And a lot of my friends, like secular friends basically, and maybe even and some believer friends seem to just have it so easy, right? And they seem to be just going through things like you know they're just breezing through it. They're getting married, and they're like life is going so well. And you part of you wonders if you're just doing something wrong, right? Because how is it, how are they able to glide through all these things, um have that same resolve for worship. And I'm just kind of stuck there, right? Like, um but yeah, as I kind of grew, I kind of realized, sticking it out and sort of letting the spirit of God explore all these things, and kind of sort through it and work through it in my mind, was an act of worship. Like, that's what it meant to worship. It, like, for me, taking charge of this, and eventually, like, in the name of Jesus, like, getting pulled out of it, because he did sort of kind of bring sense to, like, virtually all of it. Like, that you know um I it I think people who go through these things and reflect on this will all agree that no one can, you know you can never ask the question of, why aren't they, or why are things a way for them, or why is their journey a certain way. Like, the only question you can ask is this your journey? Like, is this my journey, right? And time again, it would come back to, yes, this is my responsibility. This is where God is leading me. This is what I need to do. This is how I am to worship. This is what He's put on my plate, and I can't argue that, right? Like, if He's sort of entrusted this to me, then it's my responsibility to play my part, right? Like, um and that, to me, became worship. And, um yeah, and I don't really think there is anything much more to say for, like, that's that sort of period for me. Like, I'm glad I kind of went through it. Rather, I'm glad that God sort of, like, um it was something that He sort of, um I guess, kind of orchestrated. And, I don't know why it there was the difficulties and challenges were kind of there, you know, um, but that's been gone through, and that's to the glory of God. You can't do anything but worship that. Um, you know, it was difficult. Challenges came, but He directed things through it. And you look at it, and you just have you can only worship. Like, it's just one of those things. Like, um it was depression at one point, but now it's redeemed. Or, I guess, more than redeemed, like, you find yourself worshiping God, like.
It's your testimony, bruh. It becomes a part. It's a very parallel kind of, I think, similar situation where when I was, knee deep into that, dark phase of my life, and I realized, God, what God, what the hell's going on? I don't know what's happening, or at least I do, but I'm not willing to admit it, and I'm holding so tightly onto it. But I think through it all, um, I think God uses it, and in hindsight realizes, it used to be a crutch, but now you realize that it becomes a form of submission, and of dying to yourself, that allows you to then worship God through the experience. That experience, or what he has you go through, becomes a vehicle to allow yourself to say, God, this is my form of, I can worship because you've helped me gone through this. You've helped me, step through and realize that, wow, there's a bigger picture than just me, being a little, whining little brat, trying to hopefully look into such a small scope, and you realize when God pulls you out and sees, wow, there's such a big, there's just things even much bigger that are beyond me, right? The example I was sort of coming in my head as Paul was talking about was the whole thing about, Abraham and Isaac, man. Like that moment, thinking that Abraham to sack Isaac, he's like, man, Abraham's probably thinking 100 things in his head, right? But then afterwards, he goes, okay, didn't happen. God provided a, was it ram or was it a goat? Was it goat or sheep?
Ram, I
Is
believe.
a ram, yeah. As a substitute sacrifice, and then laterwards he meets up with Abraham and shows him the things about, look, tell him, look up. And, sorry, was it the sand? Oh,
Don't slap.
oh, sorry. Okay, all right, all right, all right. Don't make weird ambient other noises. All right,
Because
got
I
it.
hear it when I.
Okay, all right, all right, all right.
Yeah.
Making your editing nightmare. But I was saying is that telling Abraham to look at the stars. This is post situation, right? And they come to a somber moment where God spends time with Abraham. Says, "I'm going to make your descendants as numerous as the stars," right? And so it's such a redeeming thing. How it becomes then, I think, in a weird way, that almost has shades of worship. Am I manipulating scripture here, or am I just sort of trying to process what it was like putting myself into his shoes and seeing sort of a redeeming factor here, right?
Yeah. So I think that's all we really are. We've got time for today. Um, so we've kind of shared some thoughts on worship, kind of unplugged, unscripted, um, and now it's kind of carrying over to depression, which is probably something we'll be talking about. I mean, we feel there's going to be a lot more to share about, in the future sometime. But yeah, it's been kind of all over the place today, but um,
That's why it's
yeah,
real.
yeah, it's real, and so yeah, we just hope it's connected or sort of spoke to some people, and we'd love to hear what people think about that. What their ideas of worship are, because we could really take this in other directions, right? And there's a lot to be said, and a lot that can there's so many different ways to worship that are so powerful, and we want to we want people to share that, and we want to enrich people there, believers, so yeah, that's all I think we're gonna say for today.
All right. So give it up for Paul and Ben, the worshippers. Okay, sorry, Lane, but yeah, guys.
Yay.
Woo.
So the next podcast will be covering more about the Christian depression, or basically just depression in general, because everyone goes through depression at some stage of life, right? Or maybe on the brink of it. But anyhow, yeah, I'd like to utter a quick prayer for everyone who's listening out here, or people who are just going through tough times, or just just trying to find your way through life. Right, so I'm gonna start a prayer real quick, and if you guys are Christians, Christian listeners, you're more than welcome to participate and receive the prayer. But if you're not, you're fine to just stick around, just hear what the prayer would be about. Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this podcast, Corvial Talk, and friends such as Ben and Paul, myself, and we could gather almost every week to share the gospel and bring up topics of relevance to today current social situation in society and stuff. We want to give thanks for your blessings over the podcast, as well as our viewers and our listeners. Keep them safe in their week ahead. Bless them in their journeys, whether at work, at school, in their family lives. We draw a bloodline over them, protect them, keep them safe, and continue to speak to them and love them, and let them get to hear your word more, Lord, and have a stronger relationship with you. We pray and ask all of this in your name. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, guys, and that's us. Jack signing out.
Ben signing off.
And Paul signing off. No, that was
Off,
disappointing.
off, off, off. All right, guys. We'll catch you in the next one and the next podcast. Stay safe.
Stay
Bye.
Bye.
frosty. Stay frosty. Stay
Bye.
frosty.